Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming along to our panel today on exploring the future of talent. I'm your host and chair, Seb Mackay. I'm the marketing manager for MBN Solutions, and I'm extremely excited to be joined by a whole bunch of people who are much more smarter and much more accomplished than I am. So they will be leading the conversation across their respective fields today. I'm joined by Elizabeth Hollinger, who is the Director of Insights at Aggreko, leads an incredibly high-performing team and is featuring on an upcoming podcast that we're releasing talking about her leadership style. I'm also joined by Gillian Docherty OBE, who is the CEO of the Data Labs, Paul Forrest, non-executive director here at MBN, as well as an entrepreneur and advisor to many successful businesses across the UK. Samantha Bedford, who is the chair for Scottish Women in Tech, and of course, Rob Huggins, who is the Client Services Director here at MBN and also the Director of Academy, which has provided employability skills and training to people across the UK. So today we're going to talk through the Future of Talent white paper, which we released a couple of months ago. We are all contributors in one way or another, and so it's going to be great to have this conversation. I thought we would work our way through the different sections of the white paper, and one of the things that I think has been most pressing and interesting over the past few months, especially as we all work remotely, is leading with purpose and purpose-driven businesses. So, Paul, I wanted to throw to you first, because you're an advisor for a lot of different businesses and a lot of extremely successful ones. And we know that purpose is important to people's engagement in their work. So can you talk me through what you believe to be purpose-driven leadership and purpose-driven business?
Well, I guess my starting point for this is really looking at I guess, what has emerged as quite a lot of hype over the course of the last couple of years, and then going back to what I think has been around for quite considerable time. The term purpose-driven leadership, or certainly anything that is belief-driven as a style of leadership, I think has actually been around for about 10 to 15 years. And we've seen some really good examples of it, where there is a fantastic alignment between both the leadership's own beliefs and belief systems, their values, what they hold dear to themselves, and those of the workforce, together with a very good alignment with what the business is in business to do in the first place. And you see it a lot with some of the more, how can I put it, probably some of the racier health sector businesses, so some of the pharmaceuticals companies, where their whole raison d'etre is about trying to change the outcomes for individuals in a way whereby there is a discernible and obvious benefit to everybody who engages with them. And they use that as a method of going out and attracting talent to come and join the business, to help them then develop new ideas, new products, and new offerings that they can bring to the marketplace that make a real difference. So there is this, it's almost, I'm going to use that horrible term that's been used before about circular economy, but not a circular economy in the economic sense, but a circular economy in terms of bringing good people in with bright ideas aligned with those of the leaders themselves and the leadership, and then activating those ideas in a way whereby you can attract new customers and new clients of your business or your services and the products that you produce. And hopefully they become good advocates in their own right and vote with their feet, and tell others to vote with their feet and come and buy more of the same from you. I think it delivers better business outcomes. I think it gives you genuine competitive advantage. And I think where we've seen it done well, it's not necessarily some of the emerging businesses, it is some of the well-established businesses that have just woken up to the fact that in order to get the brightest talent, in order to attract people, they've needed to fight a different battle than they may otherwise have had to do in the past. So whilst it's become very trendy over the last couple of years, I actually think a lot of businesses have been doing it very well for some 5 to 10 years.
Now, Elizabeth, you, as I mentioned at the start, are the leader of an extremely high-performing and engaged team. So I'm curious on your thoughts on what makes purpose important to people.
Yeah. I think it really echoes some of what Paul's been saying. I think we've seen this movement of kind of purpose-driven leadership, and starting with why over the last decade or so. Some people might be familiar with Simon Sinek's work, and he talks about the golden circle and how we start with the why, and then we go into the how and the what, like how do we do it? But we need to start with why we're doing something in the first place to really get people engaged and I suppose, feeling positive about the contribution that they're going to make. And so what I'd really try to do within the team that I run is try and understand, first of all, we have a very clear purpose in what we are trying to do. We've been very clear about the setting our mission out. So it's really clear about what we're doing and why we are doing it. So I think that's the first thing, that's been clear for people. But then going to an individual level, it's almost trying to understand what is an individual person's motivation within that whole remit of the why and what we are doing. How can we help them to progress in whichever way it is that they want to, that is aligned to the purpose that we have as an overall team and then as an overall organisation. And I've been really quite intentional about trying to give people opportunities that they can explore, that they're really interested in. And that might be, you know, a bit of a secondment into another team, learning a new skill, going off to create another network in a particular area, and really giving that person that sense of purpose for both themselves that's then aligned to the purpose that we have across the team, so that they have that individual motivation that then leads up into our overall vision and mission. So I've been quite deliberate about that.
And Gillian, CEO of the Data Lab, I mean, the things that you do with the MSc placement program and upskilling and giving people opportunities is incredible work. So I'm really interested in your perspective on how people, CEOs and leaders at different levels, can lead with purpose and can really bring that through to the whole business.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, I'm supremely fortunate to lead the organisation that I do, whose mission really is, and purpose is, to help maximise the value of data for Scotland and to lead the world to a data-powered future. It's a big, bold mission. It's also, it makes it real for the team. People come and join this team because they believe in the mission. I came and joined this team because at the time I had my daughter was 4. I could see the impact of data that was happening in the world. And I felt that actually for us to create the opportunity for my daughter and for her peers and our children, we really need to lead the way we want to use data for their organisations, whether they are commercial, private, third, and to drive that goal ourselves, to use data in a way that aligns with our values and our objectives as a nation, and as citizens and people of this country. So it's a really easy mission to get behind, really easy to describe, much more difficult to bring to life. And that's the great opportunity that we have. And the reason that people come and join us, and it's certainly not for the salary, it's for the purpose of what we're trying to do. And the other great thing is that giving people the opportunity to work across lots of domains and different sectors, and then to progress beyond the data lab and go back and do something else. And I'm really proud of all the data labbers that have been part of our organisation over the years and have gone off to do amazing things. And for me, that's also a great testament to leadership that's giving people opportunity, helping them grow, and then going and letting them flourish also somewhere else to make a difference.
That's fantastic. And Rob, you're obviously the talent guy. And I'm curious from your perspective, how businesses can show people that they want to recruit that they are purpose-driven, that they are leading in their space. You know, what does that look like from an employment brand perspective?
Yeah, I think echoing some of the points of my colleagues here, I think it begins fundamentally at the very top, but needs to be distilled down on a granular level to the actual day-to-day tasks or functions that individuals will be carrying out. I think increasingly nowadays we're seeing a very strong correlation between highly skilled individuals and a desire for purpose-led roles, purpose-led organisations, and purpose-led missions, if you like. So I think for organisations that it needs to be, and just thinking about the comment that Gillian made there about, it's not about the salary. For as long as we've been around, there have been employment options, say, for example, in the public sector, but it was never going to be about earning top dollar. It was going to be about making a massive difference. And I think now more and more organisations need to embrace that kind of logic. It's not just about the reward that you will take home in terms of the pounds and pence of the benefits. It's about the reward that you will take home in terms of what you have added, what you have contributed, what you have changed in the world. I mean, got that little phrase about our own thing in here, where we're genuinely trying to change the way things are done. And I think as organisations reflect that, and it needs to come from both the top and the bottom of the organisation, what is the why, what is the purpose, and ensuring that as soon as any individual engages with the organisation, perhaps looking for a job, it's made very, very clear to them, this is what we're trying to do, this is how you'll play a part, and this is the reward you'll gain from it.
And Samantha, you are the chair of Scottish Women in Tech, and so what would you like to see in terms of purpose happening in the technology sector and things that could be implemented?
Well, I think it's got to begin with that real authenticity. So I think, Paul, you were maybe touching on the purpose washing that has been going on for a number of years now. So, has purpose become the new sort of strap line for the organisation? But are you actually living and breathing and actioning it? Are you, as an organisation and as a leader, can your people sort of see the thread all the way through? How are you measuring it? Have you got different types of metrics now that ultimately might lead down to the bottom line? So it really does come down to that kind of, okay, right, we're saying this, but it's demonstrating what you are doing. And with all good things, it's actually being able to show that consistency as well, all the way through the organisation. So it doesn't just sit with HR, as I've seen in many organisations, that it's actually owned across the leadership spectrum. And actually, the point that Rob made there, it's also that kind of bottom up as well, because it's also about connecting the personal purpose to the organisation, and how are we as purpose-driven leaders helping others to find their personal purpose as well. But really, I think, just to summarise there, I think it is about being really authentic. And the question that I've been holding in this last year, a little bit more through COVID, which has been a phenomenal time, as we all know, is that some of the stories that have come out about a number of organisations, some very close to us up here in Scotland, it's made me question, would they have been as successful had they not worked that way, i.e. driven, not had maybe the best culture? So therefore, do you have to give something up in the short term to be really true to your purpose, to therefore build a much more sustainable business in the future that attracts the talent, retains that talent, enables that talent to go on in the market? So is there some sort of an opportunity cost of doing that really needs to be thought through? And I think just one example of what Ben and Jerry's have done recently, who were bought out, of course, by the behemoth that is Unilever some years ago, but they've just given up some income in a couple of markets because they're not comfortable with how they're operating. So whether it's in the technology sector or wherever it is, and of course there's plenty of tech going on in Unilever, it really is about how you are truly pulling that through the organisation. That's what's really going to make a difference, attract the talent and retain those people, and help women to see that I can actually foster my career within that organisation.
I'd be interested in the panel's opinions, and just to open the floor up around ways that we can help communicate these kinds of things to people within the businesses. So obviously, if talent's coming in, you can put on your job ads or your promotions, where purpose-led will help you foster will help grow you in this environment. But if people are existing in the business and they've been there 3 to 5 years and maybe feel it's a bit stagnant, how can we communicate those kinds of things to them?
I'll maybe give some thoughts to start off, Seb. I think that's a fair point, that we don't want to have these kind of purpose-driven statements as becoming stagnant or becoming lip service, but actually we don't put those things into action. And I think what's really important to make sure that doesn't happen is that they have a truly open two-way dialogue with the leadership team and everyone who works alongside them in the organisation. It should be something that we should be proactively checking in on. It's really easy just to get bogged down in the day-to-day delivery of whatever it is that we're doing and the firefighting here and getting something going live there. But I think it's something that we should be purposefully checking in on, and making the time to be able to do that and asking the right questions. And I think the way to do that in a really inclusive way, I know we'll come on to inclusivity later, but it's to make sure that there's a forum that people feel comfortable sharing their thoughts. So there will be people within the teams that are very happy to challenge in a big group of people within a meeting, and really happy to kind of share some of their thoughts. There will be others who will be happy to do that on a one-to-one basis, others who would rather submit an anonymous comment. And I think it's just making sure that we kind of create an environment and a variety of methods of communication that make sure that we cover off what people are feeling in the way that they're most comfortable in sharing that. So that's just some thoughts that that we think about across Aggreko.
I think there's definitely some good points in there, and I think the danger is people forget that they need to continue to tell stories both to the internal stakeholder and to the external stakeholders. And those stories are if you like, they become the rule set that you can then benchmark that organization against. It's much easier to test transparency and authenticity if you know that they're actually promoting a position which you can easily validate by talking to people who either work for that organization or engage with them in some way, shape or form. And I think it's often lost because large organizations in particular that get bogged down in producing their annual report and looking at cash and assets and all of those wonderful things, quite often get distracted from the meat and meat of the messages they ought to be putting out to help the next generation of talent come through and say, there's a business I want to work with, not because they're profitable, not because they're the best in the marketplace, but because they do something that aligns adequately with my own personal beliefs, and I can get behind that. And as a direction of travel, I think that's important for me to be in that type of business. What does it mean? Well, it means that you need, as exactly as Elizabeth has said, you need mechanisms and tools by which people can put their contribution into the mix, either anonymously or vocally and in open forum. And the organisation needs to be brave enough to be able to say, well, we're prepared to share those warts and all, no matter what the impact of those is, so that people can see that we're acting upon these and that those actions speak louder than the pure words, and that we can be agile about implementation of outcomes based on that. And I think that's perhaps what we should see as the next generation of that sort of transparency, particularly in reporting.
So that's an absolutely wonderful lead into the second part of the white paper, which is about talent magnetism, and more broadly, the idea of how do you attract the best talent in the market, especially when there are more jobs than talent available. So Rob, I want to start with you on this one, because we've talked a little bit before about employment brand and the idea that you have a marketing brand which goes out to your customers and clients, and then an employment brand that should go out to people that you want to hire. So can you talk me through the benefits of focusing on an employment brand?
The benefits largely, not the myriad, but largely to come to the point that where we are at the moment in terms of the talent market for data and technology, I think it would be fair to say unprecedented times. And I've been doing this now for coming up on a quarter of a century. And where we are at the moment is quite unprecedented. And it's a combination of a number of different factors, but the reality is here, and a simplistic way of thinking about it is the hunter has become the hunted. We are now in a situation where talented individuals, and to reflect back on the first point that we're discussing, talented individuals now have a huge amount of choice when it comes to where they want to work. It's not necessarily about organisations saying, well, we want to hire people, we'll throw out a few adverts and then we cherry pick the best. If an organisation even wants to be considered by the very best talent, then work has to be done in employment brand. And I think it was Samantha who mentioned earlier on about not siloing off purpose into an HR department, if you like. In my opinion, talent magnetism should never be siloed off into an HR function. It should be a holistic concept that's embraced by every individual within the organisation. Because the fundamental here is that employment brand, that message that says to the market, you're a great place to work, should be treated as importantly as brand that you would use in terms of marketing your brand to consumers or customers. At the moment, I think there is a huge lag in organisations adopting this concept universally. I think obviously we've got exemplars. We've got organisations out there that do it fantastically well. But my opinion, based on my experience, is that a lot of organisations have still to wake up to the reality that, and for example, a talented data scientist in the markets that I work within are Central Belt, Scotland and London, a talented data scientist in any of those markets right now today will have a dozen options of where they want to go and work. And it's about the employment brand as to which ones that individual will start to prioritise in terms of their efforts. Organisations need to wake up to this reality, because it's the reason why organisations will struggle to hire in this space.
So we will talk about diversity and inclusion later on, as Elizabeth alluded to before, but Paul rightly said that businesses need to be upfront, warts and all, with how things can be improved. And we can't really shy away from the fact that if you are not, male and pale and straight, the tech and data science industry can be horrible. So I want to start with you, Sam, about how companies can make sure that their hiring is more inclusive, or that their employment brand is more inclusive and open to people that aren't just males, or male identifying, I should say.
Yeah, and I think it's very simple, but I'd like to just sort of draw our attention to, it starts with, I'm not convinced that people really get the benefits of diversity and inclusion. I'm just not convinced at the moment. I think what's good is that they know that it's important, but I think for a number of businesses, it can still be a bit of a box ticking exercise. So I still think there's work to be done in terms of that knowledge, but what I hear a lot of, it's often passive. I need training, and my response to that is no, you need to go out and seek this. So I think that there's something there around, I've been involved in a number of sort of innovation roles throughout my career. When you want to do something new and you don't know how to do it, well, you hire great consultants, you hire great people. So there are plenty of organizations that you can be hiring, and you can be really kind of growing the knowledge first and foremost. Then I think it comes down to some of the things that Rob just touched on there, with that brand being really consistent, and recognizing that your employees are all influencers of your brand. And then I think there are just the really simple practical things like I've just become chair of Scotland Women in Tech, and at the start of my tenure as chair, we've gone out to the market and just said, okay, what does SWIT need to be doing now? And we've had some great response from anonymous people, right, in the Scottish market, and that was intentional as well. And what we've heard is like, why do hardly any companies in Scotland advertise or support two to 3 days a week in technical or developer roles? I just don't see them. I just don't see that there are job shares. These sort of things just don't exist. Now, those aren't necessarily for women, but they're just generally for people that want to have a more flexible, a more, attuned to their life way of working. So I think there are practical things like that to really consider. I know they're not easy, but if you are really convinced and understand the business case, because there's plenty of data to support the business case for diversity, then put the work in to do that and to make it work for people. And then there are the practical things, like anonymizing. We're recruiting for trustees on the board at the moment, so trying to make that process as anonymous as possible. And what's brilliant is that when you talk to people and when you talk to those different organizations that are experts, they will open your eyes to things that you don't see because you haven't put those types of glasses on. So around things, I know in the white paper we talk about neurodiversity. Even social class, right? Even asking somebody about what degree they have. Well, even putting that in a field, what does that do for that person that's applying? So I think there are some really good practical basics out there that any company, small or large, can adhere to, but start with really understanding the importance of diversity, what you need to know about it. And it's an ongoing journey. Let's be honest, this isn't a one and done. Take a real interest, show that interest, and then the rest will start to happen.
So Gillian, I can see you nodding along there. I mean, as a CEO, what's your take on all of this?
So as I guess, firstly, as a woman who's been in the technology business for 30 years, my personal background's been really interesting in this space and the attraction of diversity and back to almost the talent magnetism piece. So a couple of things is you need to be, I do agree with Samantha that you need to understand the case and you need to be bought into it. It is not tick box ticking exercise. There is absolute value. There is some that say that if your AI development team is not diverse, then your algorithm is by default biased. Some will agree with that, some won't. But the biggest opportunity is we are denying organizations the benefit of their entire society, their backgrounds, their thoughts, their expertise, their personal lived experience. And in technology, we are building technology to benefit people. At the end of the day, you know, companies, whether it's B2B or B2C, at the end of the day, products and services and the economy is about benefiting our society and our people and creating things that matter. And to do that, we are currently denying ourselves access to the maximum amount of talent that is out there. So first of all, absolutely, you know, understand the value of it. Secondly, be very, very deliberate. Don't ever stop asking yourself the question, are we doing the most here? Whether that's in recruitment, whether that's in retention, whether that is in, you know, the values that you are living by in your organization, whether it's, you know, even down to simple things like images that you have on your website, images on your product brochures, events that you run, the makeup of speakers, the opportunities that you give to your team, that, you know, whether that's press interviews or external exposure, are you showcasing the diversity of your organization? All of those things, and almost you need to be very, very deliberate about asking the tough question on yourself, your SLT, your organization, your teams. Are we doing enough? Because I would bet the majority of us, if we really ask that question, I'm not sure we would give ourselves 100% out of 100% across the board of everything we do. And it just gives us opportunity to improve. And I think that's really exciting.
Now, Elizabeth, your team ranges from people that are extremely experienced, people that are new across gender, and I know it's fairly diverse. You've done an extremely good job putting that together. What's been your trick, secret, you know, what's made it work for you?
Yeah. I think from the outset, when I first took on the role I'm in now in Aggreko just over 3 years ago, I was really conscious about wanting to create a diverse team and not to go through a tick box exercise to say, okay, now I've got 3 women, I've got someone who's from a different ethnic background, I have someone who's has a disability. You know, I wanted to make sure that we were truly creating diversity of thought in the people that we were engaging with. And that we could bring together a whole different group of people who would think about problems in a different way. And so I didn't quite realise it at the time, but what I was really trying to get to was cognitive diversity, which comes from a range of different things. It does come from your cultural background, ethnicity, nationality, gender, you know, socioeconomic status. It comes from a whole bunch of different things. But what it means is when you get that cognitive diversity, that people approach problems in very different ways. So I've been really conscious about trying to create that across the team. And that means that we have now within the team an age range of about 40 years from people who are straight out of university, some from the Data Labs MSc programs, to people who have worked in roles in the last kind of 30, 40 years in the technology industry and have lots and lots of experience in going through different kind of changes in the sector. And we've also been really conscious about recruiting people who have been to university and have some professional qualifications, and also those who haven't, who've worked their way through different functions, different roles, have broader experience in different types of environments, and brought them into the team too. And what I really started to notice once we started to get this team and that mixture of experience together, is we were just having better and more challenging conversations. We didn't have this kind of groupthink where we were all going to approach the problem in the same way and go down the same potentially wrong path. that we had done before. And to make sure that that worked effectively, we had to make sure the environment we created was inclusive, that everyone was able to be their authentic self, was able to challenge, was able to contribute in the best way, so that we did really get the benefit of that diversity in thought and the benefit of all of the experience that we have around the table, where everyone is valued as equal. So yeah, we've been really, really conscious about that. And as Samantha and Gillian have already said, there's plenty of studies that talk about diversity and the benefits that are driven from it. We are seeing some of those now. And, I think it's absolutely something that all organisations should be looking at.
So we're having some really great questions come through on the Q&A and on the chat. So keep those coming because we will be answering all of them towards the end of the conversation. We have some time put aside for a Q&A section. Now, Paul, I have a whole bunch of questions for you lined up for your part of the white paper. You were talking about the globalization of talent. And to summarize that, with the remote working that's been happening now, I think companies have realized that they can have teams in different parts of the UK, in Europe, perhaps even in America. So can you talk me through a little bit about how businesses can navigate post-Brexit hiring from the EU? Because I know that's a question that's come up a lot in tech and data science.
Sure. I'm not sure it's the right question for businesses to ask, if I'm being honest, because I think the situation pre-pandemic was this notion that we were all going to go down the route of point-based visa schemes and the like. And in reality, we've got so many more opportunities now because there's so much more trust that's been embedded within organizations in terms of allowing employees to work from anywhere, have a proper team-based approach to working from anywhere and utilizing the technology that we've had for many, many years. A lot of the people on the call will know that I do a lot of work in the media space and in the film industry. We've used collaborative technologies for years because often the first time we actually get together physically is normally the first day of principal photography. And all of that development hell that we go through to get a film to the start line often is done via technology such as Zoom, phones, or other methods. But actually what it shows you is that with other people adopting that, we now have opened the door to not just Europe, but the entire world as a destination for people to work. And that's not just for people who are already there, that's potentially for people in the UK choosing to relocate. One of the most exciting things for me is I've just been through a recruitment process with one of the businesses I'm involved with, where we've hired a guy who lives on a boat off the coast of the south of England, who can go wherever he wants, and he can sail that boat across to Europe. He can sail it wherever he likes, and he can work from there very, very effectively. And frankly, I'm not really too fussed where the boat is moored, because they deliver an outstanding contribution to the team, and they just get on and do it irrespective of where we all are or what we think are the normal demands of where people need to be. Now you then put that into the global talent place and marketplace, and you see that some countries are waking up to this quite quickly and realizing that they can entice and attract people to come and live in those countries but work in the UK because their infrastructure is good enough to support that. So post-Brexit, I think you've got this situation where previously we thought, well, how are we going to get some of these really talented European people to come and work for us post-Brexit? Well, actually, it's now a question of how do we get the best talent from wherever they are in the UK, beyond the shores of the UK in Europe, beyond the shores of Europe and in the rest of the world. And a lot of that comes back to what we've already been covering in terms of the employment proposition. You've got to have, and I don't think somebody used the term earlier, I know we've talked about employment brand. I think employment brand is fine, but brand always seems like 2 point in time, whereas the employment proposition, I think, is something which is much more about the DNA or the fabric of the business. And it's something which I think if you get it right, it's a continual draw and a continually magnetic field that brings people to your front door to come and work with you because you're the right type of organization for them and for their skills. So, yeah, if you want to go down that route of hiring people from Europe, there is a points-based system which is available to us, and we can go down that route if we choose to, or we can allow people to stay in their European countries and work for us here, which is a bit of a blind spot for the UK government as they've realised that they're going to lose some of the tax income associated with that. and they use employers of record for that. So an employer of record in Spain, for example, can hire someone who then works for a British business, and they operate the payroll over in Spain and deal with all of the legalities and the nif-naf and trivia associated with bringing that person on board. But they still work for you, but they work from their home in Barcelona or wherever else, which we've done in a business recently. Or you attract people to come and work for you, where essentially you can operate with them through consulting agreements or contracts other than employment contracts. And again, it changes the nature of the relationship ever so slightly. There are essentially some pitfalls and bear traps there in terms of getting it wrong, and you do have to watch out for some of the short-term tax implications, but it is nevertheless an opportunity. Now, if you look nearshore, and just echoing some of Samantha's and Elizabeth's thoughts, I'm working on an initiative at the moment where we're employing ex-service personnel, men and female, men and women, and we're bringing them into the fold to train them up and equip them with new skills, but we're giving them places where they can come and live. So some of them who are living on the street at the moment, we're giving them somewhere where they can come and live and learn and develop new skills. And then we're not just helping them into employment, we're creating whole new businesses around these cohorts of people who can solve complex business challenges, whether in data, whether in DevOps. And some of them have got very, very diverse backgrounds. What we're already finding is some of those will be the future talent that we'll be after most, who will be at the top of the list. We recently brought somebody in who'd done 3 years in the Royal Marines and had lost a limb in the Royal Marines. And their background prior to joining up was in art. They were a sculptor. And cross-training them into DevOps has been the most amazing thing ever, because, as Elizabeth said, they see problems in completely different ways. They have a different lens to look at the business through, and bringing that to bear has been quite dramatic in terms of creating a necessary challenge, a positive challenge within the team, but also giving us different outcomes and different ways forward. And I would hope that post-Brexit, we forget about the actual geographical limitations, we forget about the actual challenge of trying to bring people into the country, and we just look at new ways of engaging people from wherever they come from, whether they're in the UK, from whatever background, whatever environment, whatever their previous history, whether they're off the streets or straight out of university, or whether they've come from school as a GCSE or A-level leaver. And we look at what they can offer, and we look at genuinely how we can maximize the potential that they bring to bear in the context of what we need from the future pool of people we want to work with.
So with all of that in mind, Rob, I'm keen on your thoughts around, do you think that remote teams made up of local and geographically diverse people are going to become the new normal in our industries?
It's happening already. It has been happening for quite some time now. To give an example, we are often asked to contribute market research and thought leadership to organisations that are looking at their hiring plans. And I remember being asked the question pretty recently about who are our local competition. My response was, you need to stop thinking local, because your competition now is all over the world. If you look at what has happened from Brexit through COVID, and where we all were a year ago, and the great experiment, whether or not it could work, and we now know that it does work. It's changed everything forever. And now we are being asked frequently to see if we can find UK-based talent for international organisations, because they value the skills and the price is very competitive. And so our organisations, be they based in Scotland, London or wherever, need to wake up very, very quickly to the reality that their competition is now no longer people within their postcode. It's people within 2 to 3 hours time zone difference on either side, because we're seeing it all the time now. Scotland's built such an amazing reputation for talent. London has always been a place you go for talent. Organisations worldwide are not crazy. They will come where the talent is, and they will build the systems that allow that talent to connect with the business. To Paul's point, it may not necessarily be a strict employee proposition. There will be other ways of doing it. But the challenge now is keeping up with what is a global marketplace, because the talent in the UK can now work virtually anywhere in the world.
Samantha, I know you have thoughts on that, and I would love to hear them.
Yeah, thanks. I'd just like to also kind of not just think of remote as not being in the same town or city or country for that matter, because I think that what this gives us the opportunity, particularly around, there's a massive gap, as we all know, of women working in technology. The huge benefit that remote working brings is that it makes it so much more accessible and appealing. And as somebody who's also worked in this field for the whole of my career, I think it can really shift the dynamic of the culture of that technology team as well, to make it much more accessible. The after the pub conversations, just the different things that can happen. So I hope that it does become the norm, but that we think of remote as not necessarily, you've got to be in another market, but actually that role can be done remotely, and we can still create a really productive and dynamic team and do it remotely. And I think that can really help to shift the gender gap in technology.
Gillian, I'd love your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I think there's a potential other opportunity here as well. And Rob mentioned about organisations from potentially, around the world coming to look for talent here that will remain physically here, but are working for companies around the world. I think there's an opportunity for us to provide almost local connections and communities to support those individuals. You might be the only person working for that organisation that's headquartered in Spain, and you're the only one in Scotland. But there are maybe peers in other organisations that are working just down the street or down the road. And I think there's an opportunity, and we've got a great basis here in Scotland, I think, to do this, to create those connections. The data science meetup community that MBN run, some of the programs that the Data Lab run, the activities, Scottish Women in Technology. How do you create that connection where you're giving local support? Because I think that's another great advantage for international organisations looking for talent here, where they feel their employees, although physically based here, do have a local support network. And you can see it with Scottish Women in Technology, Samantha, that's exactly what they do. They provided a connected network for women who work with different organisations, some very small, some large multinationals. But you've got that community and support locally that, if you needed to go for a coffee and chew an idea over with someone, you can do that physically. And I think that's a great opportunity.
And Elizabeth, Aggreko is an international company, right? And you mentioned to me before that you'll have teams working in Australia or, Europe, emails coming in all times of night and that kind of thing. So I'm keen to ask you what are the challenges of integrating those kinds of remote cross-market teams that we've been talking about, and how can it be done?
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. I do agree with Phil of the comments that it provides a huge opportunity, but I do think there's a challenge in there too. And I think, Gillian, what you were talking about with local networks and providing support is really important when we're starting to have these teams which are operating remotely, or we have kind of satellites around about. I think that one of the things that we try to do across Aggreko with our global business is make sure that we do have those regular face-to-face, as in video call check-ins with people on a relatively regular basis. I know that we are all now used to Zoom and Microsoft Teams, but we weren't 2 years or so ago. But in Aggreko, actually, that had grown quite a bit in popularity, because it meant that we were able to interact and see one another when we were working on projects with colleagues in North America or in the Middle East or somewhere else. And I do think that the one thing we need to be very conscious of that can provide challenge when we are working remotely is just that human factor and the human interaction. And actually, it's really important to make those human connections, because it makes any difficult conversation much easier to have when you go down the line. So I think working remotely is fantastic. It's opened up lots of opportunities. I agree with Samantha, both for people who are still living and working locally, but are able to have much better flexibility by working remotely, as well as extending the talent pool and the reach that we have. But the one thing I would say is we do need to work hard as leaders within organisations to make sure that those people still feel the human connection and the purpose to what they're doing, to make sure that then they do still feel part and inclusive of that team. And that's something, as I say, we do try to do across our global teams. And I think video calls and actually physically seeing people is a really good way to be able to do that.
Yeah, I certainly feel like I spend my entire life on Zoom or Microsoft Teams.
Maybe a bit too much at the moment. At one point, maybe it'll balance out a little bit better, but yeah, still a hugely powerful tool.
Now, we need to talk about diversity and inclusion. Obviously, we've been talking about this across the conversation, and a lot of the things that we've covered, you can't talk about without including diversity and inclusion. And there's been some really good points raised around how people don't necessarily understand the value. I hosted a panel at the end of Pride Month talking with people specifically around LGBTQ plus inclusion, and then was lucky enough to join one recently where people talking about how we can tie the sort of financial contribution of diversity and inclusion to the bottom line. So understanding that, for example, if someone's part of the LGBTQ plus community and they feel that they can be themselves at work, they're then able to put their mind and their energy into work, as opposed to not accidentally outing themselves or worrying about, discrimination. So I do want to start this process with hiring. We've all spoken about different types of people that we hire. And I'm curious about how we can make hiring processes more inclusive. So, Samantha, should we start with you? Because I'm really keen on your thoughts on this.
Well, I think first of all, there are the basics, and this does come back to attraction, but kind of links to the hiring. The gender pay gap, for example, was mandated back in 2017. And of course, there are parameters around that, but I would say publish it even if you don't have to. But then off the back of that, and I'm also on the board of Close the Gap up here in Scotland, also kind of be really clear about your action plan and your timescales. And likewise, the ethnicity pay gap, which isn't mandated, so just kind of think about those things that maybe you could be doing, but actually you should be doing, because just like we are going to be looking at our candidates, they are really going to be kind of looking at us with their different lenses. And I think it's okay if you're not there yet, but demonstrating that you've got a roadmap, targets, again back to that word authenticity, then I think that's helpful, and I would say it's a should be done, and I think that it really is being able to demonstrate a lot of things. We hear a lot from our community and Scotland Women in Technology of people want to see more and more role models. They want to see people like them. So when you're going through that hiring and your employer proposition, which I think is a lovely distinction between brand, just think about, if somebody is to kind of, lift the bonnet and really look at you, then how are you ensuring that you are really showing yourself at your best and the things that you actually do, and that you've actually got great role models, and they're not just the seniors, they're not just the Gillians, right? Because we need to see that there's a broad range of people that we can relate to and that we can earlier in our careers be seeing as well. So I think it's demonstrating really actively that you're supportive. So it's going beyond the words. You've got to have the basics, but I think it's being able to don't just tell me, but show me. And that starts with, when that candidate is doing their desk research as well.
In the white paper, we talk about neurodiversity and sexuality, and there are two really interesting things that came out of that. So the first is that Gen Z, about 40% of them don't identify as being straight, so they sit somewhere on the sexuality spectrum. The second part of that I thought was really interesting was 70% of people with autism want to work but are unable to find work. How can we make our work, and I'm going to open this up to the floor, how can we make our workspaces more inclusive for people that are neurodiverse or people that have physical disabilities?
I'll come in on that one, Seb. So there's still a huge amount of work to be done in this space, but there's some things we are trying. So we've been supporting an organisation called Auticon for a number of years, giving them access to our space, our networks, and Auticon hire neurodiverse people, and then that is their consulting team who they deploy into organisations, particularly in roles that are, you know, that these individuals with amazing talents absolutely thrive in. They are experts in creating a workplace that is suitable, whether that's quiet spaces, you know, places to think, you know, and really help educate employers on things they need to consider. Because if you don't know, or you have no personal experience of people maybe who have neurodiversity and may have certain needs to get the best out of them, and it's back to your point, bringing your whole self to work, you need to ask someone that can help coach you through that. So there's things like that. We've recently ran a number of courses with Equate and Code Clan on women, neurodiverse women in data science, and giving them opportunities to learn, and then providing access to that network. And again, it's about giving organisations the chance to really tap into some amazing talent that maybe they didn't otherwise have to. Huge amounts of way to go. Absolutely. We're just talking about, you know, baby steps, you know, initial steps that we need to take. But I think it's really, really exciting. And I think we all need to take some personal responsibility to be deliberate about our actions. Is actually, are we giving the opportunity to, whether it's neurodiverse individuals for the, you know, from LGBT or individuals from different backgrounds, the opportunity to come and work in some of the most amazing teams that we have?
I think there's a lot to be said for being, back to that word, authentic, and admitting that we don't know what we don't know. Because I think 5 years ago, I don't think I'd ever heard the phrase neurodiverse 5 years ago. And I think it's been a long journey for a lot of individuals to come to terms with the realization that there is a huge section of society that could be contributing so much if just small changes were made. I think to a point that Samantha made earlier on with regards to how things might change, I think fundamentally the technology industry is small c conservative by nature. Its working patterns have been adopted from post-industrial revolution, be in the factory 9 to 5 type practices. But I think what we've seen over the last 18 months has been that it doesn't need to always be that way, that things can and should change for the better. And I think to the point that Samantha made about perhaps the 2 to 3 day working week or the job share thing, I think that the scarcity of talent in certain areas is going to force change. I think organisations are going to go, oh, we desperately need this. We can't find it in the working model of 9 to 5 in the office. We're going to need to be creative. We might need to look at job share. We might need to look at necessary adjustments for neurodiverse individuals. I think that the competition for talent, I'm an optimist here, and I think that the competition for talent will force enlightened, innovative employers to change the game. And they'll be the places that will have the diverse teams because they'll accommodate everybody. They'll be the places that will have the competitive advantage because they will recognise that if we do the same thing as everybody else, we ain't going to get the best people. And I'm optimistic about that.
Just if I could build on that, Rob, I totally agree. And I think that there's a very real prospect here that what we'll see is the next iteration of differentiation between large and established businesses and the startup communities that we see thriving very effectively will actually be driven by the ability of the smaller, more agile organizations that are more willing to try out different ways of engaging with different communities of people with a variety of different agendas sitting behind it. I think they're the ones who will probably force a behavioral shift elsewhere. But it will then be a question of, well, if you're a business that is desperately trying to protect your core by doing the same as you've done for the last 100 years, how long can you genuinely survive if you don't adopt some of these new models, if you don't actually pay more than lip services. If you're inauthentic in any way, shape or form, what are your prospects of survival? And therefore it's incumbent upon all business leaders to look for where the best examples are and try to borrow, maybe even beg, steal, collaborate, cooperate with other organizations who are already blazing a path there.
Elizabeth, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I agree with all that's been said before, and I think the education part is just really important for leaders. As we start to employ different types of people with different needs, different skill sets, we need to be flexible and what our expectations are of those people, and when they will absolutely outperform in some areas that we are not aware of, and they'll need some support in other areas, and we need to make sure that we create an environment in which they're able to thrive. And I think what's really important and what will really help that is giving accountability to ourselves as leaders, also to the individual who's coming in to share with us how it's going, is this working for you, what is working, what isn't, how do we make this better, what additional support might you need? And accountability across our teams as well. How do we make sure that our teams create that inclusive environment that is then able to adapt to allow for anything that they might need to, for everyone to be there and be their authentic selves. And I think it can almost sometimes be a very subtle point, because there might at times be a passing comment that somebody makes that they might not think would be insulting, whether it's about gender, ethnicity, sexuality, whatever it might be. It might have been a joke that they would assume people would take it as that, but actually it's not. And that then makes that person in the team who that might have been targeted to feel less confident, feel less included, and feel less able to be their authentic selves. So I think that point in accountability, yes, starts with leaders, but actually has to flow through the whole of the team and their behaviours and their actions, and calling out where they might see things that wouldn't be inclusive or wouldn't enable people to be part of their team, and really coming to show their true and their best selves. So I think that's really important to make sure that it can be successful.
And Gillian, I want to grab you for one last question before you have to go, because as a CEO, I'm curious on your thoughts around, can we mandate some of those things that Elizabeth just talked about? So, should they be in HR policy? Should they be in training when people come into the organization? What does that look like?
I think you've got to embed it, and you've got to make it your everyday thing, because if it's like anything you're trying to do as a business, if it's on the side, if it's extra, then it's optional. It can't be optional. It's got to be embedded in your everyday existence, your being. It's almost your values. Your values as an organisation need to be lived and breathed. They're not a slogan on the wall. And I think about purpose in the same way. I think about your, whether it's your brand or your proposition. You've got to think about them in the same way. So you've got to have the processes, the checks, as I said to you earlier, about really hard, questions of yourself and your teams. Are we doing everything we can? Because if you don't do that, then it's just easy to forget it. And oh yeah, we don't have diversity in our organisation. Well, we're trying. Well, I'm sorry, but that probably is not good enough anymore.
I'd love to open the floor up to questions now from the audience. We've had some really great ones come through. So we'll start with the diversity and inclusion ones, because, this is where we are at the moment. So one question from Spencer is, how come there aren't any equality, diversity and inclusion policies in place for every employer? So I suppose they could be mandated or, in law, that kind of thing. I'll open that up to the floor.
I see a lot of organisations doing this. I know there's at the moment there is nothing that forces people to do it, but actually personally, from personal perspective, I think if you were trying to force people to do this, you would end up with, it's the term Samantha used earlier. I mean, people will just cheat the system. They will do it and point to a whole set of policies or a policy deck that they potentially don't follow. I quite like the idea of being able to differentiate by saying, yes, we've got these policy statements, but look, here's the proof of the pudding. This is what we do to not just aspire to be a better organisation, but this is how we can show that we've lived and breathed the values that we set out with our own purpose in such a way as it means that we have ended up with a more inclusive, more diverse workforce that benefits the business. And look at how much better we're thriving economically than some of our peers. and that almost that shift or that pressure on that lever to force others to then do it from an authentic perspective rather than just going through it by rote or just going through the motions, I think would be a better outcome. If you look at what happened with gender pay gap is a really, really interesting issue. And if you look at what happened there, it was cheated by so many organizations because it was so easy to manipulate it. You know, I can look at a 5-year pay deal for any woman in the business. I can look at a 5-year pay deal and I can try and change and massage those numbers to look like there's a degree of equality with what I'm paying a male doing exactly the same job, because actually I've looked at other things in there, including maternity pay and other bits and pieces I may have thrown into the mix. And suddenly I've got a like for like that stands close enough scrutiny that I can tick that box. That's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to actually turn around and produce a feeling and a vibe in the organization that says that everybody knows that there is equal pay there, because everybody has access to that open communication of what people are rewarded with and remunerated by, so that you can see firsthand what it's like and you can become an advocate then of the value of that business, that organization, to other people at whatever level you're at in the organization. And that becomes part of the employment proposition in its own right and becomes part of the movement for change.
Rob, there's a question here that I think you're well placed to answer, and it's around candidates with disabilities struggling with finding work because they don't have enough experience or qualifications. So obviously you're the director of the MBN Academy, and the Academy has given employability training to people. So what do you think we can do as an industry to support those people?
I think as an industry, I think it comes back to the point that we were just discussing there. I think as an industry, I think this requires mandated change. I think this is something that perhaps a governmental solution should be looked at. It's something that I feel, to the question just before this one, I think the short and sweet answer to that is, you know, we live in a fundamentally unfair society. And I think that it would be nice if provisions could be made to allow people with disabilities to be able to engage with the workplace better. But unfortunately, it's been left to organisations. From the employability stuff that we done, I would say to any individual with disabilities looking to engage with employment, it's the classic chicken and egg problem. How do you get a job without experience when you need experience to get the job? The short-term solution I would suggest is to look at any form of volunteering work to build any kind of skills, and you know, any kind of commercial skills or accruable commercial skills in any way that could be transferred across. That's the short answer. The long-term answer, it's a complex issue, and it's a complex issue that I think, to previous answers, number one, is going to be driven by scarcity of resource. If somebody with a disability has valuable skills that are required by an employer, then that employer will change the game to allow that individual to work for them. And I think that scarcity of resource will drive change. But I also think that purpose-led talent will drive change. I think that individuals with skills who are working within organisations are eventually going to chat the door enough to force change to happen. So unfortunately, there isn't a short and sweet answer at this point in time. For an individual looking to cross-train into the industry or looking to transfer into the industry without skills, volunteering is the short and easy answer. However, it's a complex issue that I think requires, as I say, a governmental solution. Make it law and things might happen.
Elizabeth, sorry, Paul.
Sorry, Sarah. I was just going to say, I think it's fine. I think it's fine having the legislation there. I just am concerned that people need a big stick to make those changes. You know, I personally take a view that says, well, we should be looking for a different breed of leader, a different breed of worker, a different breed of citizen in general, in the sense that we should have people who are not looking at the physical package and how that's presented in whatever way, shape or form, wherever they come from or what challenges they may face, but actually look at the value that can be contributed. Yeah. I work with a triple amputee, not because they're a triple amputee. Frankly, I don't give a flying proverbial. I work with them because they're the best possible person for that particular role. And they deliver so much value that I couldn't see myself working with anyone else in those circumstances. And it's then down to me to make the necessary changes to be able to have that person work in the same environment that other people might work in, and to put the extra effort in to make sure that they're not disadvantaged because of the physical challenges they face. And I don't need the government to give me a big stick behind me to make me do that. I need to have woken up to the fact that this person's got much more to offer if I'm prepared to make those changes and I'm prepared to actually engage with them.
Yeah, Paul, I think that's absolutely right. And I think in an ideal world, we'd want all of our leaders to behave and to respond like that. I think in reality, people don't. I think that in order to effect some change more quickly, having something like ideally a big carrot, but probably more likely a big stick, will make people more likely to take action more quickly than they otherwise would have. So I agree, it would be great if everyone thought like that. I just think in reality, it won't happen with all of the other pressures and things people deal with. I think one of the kind of interesting things and reflecting back on, you know, people maybe don't have the kind of right skills and experience for particular roles. I do think there's something we can do as leaders to support them in that, though, is to be open-minded and not to expect it. Within the team, and I talked earlier about building our diverse team, I have proactively recruited people with no experience in technology into our teams intentionally. Even if someone has experience in technology today, in 2 years' time, it will be redundant. It moves far too quickly. Yeah. So actually, in anything, what I look for more than anything when I meet any candidate, and I think it's a difficult thing to get through in a CV, so I would say that in terms of CV screening, it's a really difficult thing to get through. But particularly in any conversation, I would just look for interest and passion. And if you have the two of those things, you're interested in what you want to do, then you will make the effort to learn the things you need to learn with the right support around you. And I would make sure that that would be in place. So I think as leaders, we can be open-minded about it. I think a big stick in the short term will make things go quicker.
I think just on the point about finding some of those people, I think the idea of not relying on the CV is really, really important. Yeah. I think some of the work that Rob has done in particular in terms of leading the development of groups where they spend time learning about each other, learning about each other's skills and opportunities to work together in things like the meetups and through the academy are great ways in which you can do that. It then becomes important that you're able to start to capitalize upon that, or from their own personal perspective, monetize their skills, relationships and experience. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think we're going to see a lot more of relationship driven signaling of people having the right kind of skills to be the best possible person for your team going forward. And, you know, I think it's fine if the government are required to come in and give us a big stick, that's fine. I think it would be dreadful if that happens, because I know how long primary legislation takes and I know how badly it's been implemented in the past. And I think that if we can do anything through more of the same in terms of building communities of people where even if the skills that sit within that community aren't right for you here and now for today, you can do something to promote and promulgate the availability of those skills to other people within your network. You'll get a fantastic 6 degrees of separation model going in no time at all. That means that people will have the very best prospects, even if you don't have a vacancy.
There was an excellent question from George around recruitment. And the question essentially, and I feel like we've discussed it a bit just now, was do recruiters need to try harder to find different kinds of people? You know, is it too easy to go and find the same kind of person and then send them off to, you know, a job?
Do recruiters need to try harder to find a different type of person? Is that
as opposed to, say, just, you know, men for a tech role. So to find, you know, women, people with disabilities, that kind of thing.
I suppose the first question I would ask is whether or not you mean external service providers like myself, or whether you mean recruiters that work for brands themselves. I think the answer is yes and no. I think I mean, I know, and I'm sitting here and I'm going, oh, if my CEO is watching this, remembering him and I pushing a shopping trolley up cobblestone streets full of crates of beer, night after night, in the cold, in the wet, in the rain, for years, building meetups to ensure that we got out there to the widest possible audience.
You got the pizzas.
Yeah, the work of the academy, the work of the academy. Yeah, we've tried really, really, really hard to do this because it's very, very easy. Anybody can whack on Grammarly and put an ad on LinkedIn, and yeah, you're going to get the blokes applying, but it's really, really difficult to try and do your best to touch as many people as possible. That is a hard thing to do. So yes, in my opinion, recruiters should do that. That should be part and parcel of the service proposition that you offer. But my challenge here would be to organisations themselves. It's very easy to send an angry email down to your recruitment service provider demanding diversity in their shortlist. My challenge would be, well, yeah, Mr. or Mrs. multi-billion-dollar turnover business, what exactly are you doing? I feel that there's a battle that needs fought there, and every single individual who's willing to fight that battle is needed. And I think it's a very myopic perspective to just dump this on your service provider. But that's probably a conversation for another day. It comes back to the point that was made earlier about it's every now and again it seems to me to be just an exercise that once a year we'll change the logo, or once a year we'll say that we're bang on and we're into women and stuff. Organisations need to do this 9 to 5 every day, and it needs to be mandated from the top, and it needs leaders throughout the business to take this to heart. To go back to the idea around talent magnetism, if you want to get the best people, that's the way you're going to be all the time anyway. It's not an accident.
I'd probably add to that, Robbie. I don't think it should all be on recruitment providers to give diverse lists. And I think I would go back to that point about being open-minded. We can, as leaders, request that people have these 10 specific skills and then expect a big, huge diverse candidate pool to come back for us because they just don't exist. I think that's the point. So I think we need to be a bit more flexible in our expectations and what we're looking for, and also to look in the places that we maybe haven't before for some of the talent.
Yeah, I think that last point there, Elizabeth, is probably one of the most important. This whole project that we're running in London at the moment, where we are taking communities of people from wherever their backgrounds are. I mean, most of them have come off the streets, and we give them somewhere to live, and we give them somewhere where they can study for 2 days a week and somewhere they can work for 3 days a week using the skills they're learning as they study. And we suddenly find we've got all of these people that we never previously knew about, and they've all got very wide, broad skills and competencies that, if carefully wrangled and managed and cultivated, you suddenly find you've got more than a viable community of workers there. You've actually got some superstars and future talented individuals that virtually any organisation would be proud to have on the books.
We had a great question come through from Didi about retraining. So obviously with the pandemic, a lot of people who had jobs that would have otherwise been secure, like, pilots and those kinds of people, have had to retrain. Are there ways that different industries can support that kind of retraining? And so I suppose for tech, we have things like Code Clan, right? Or MBN Academy and different things. What would you all like to see?
What I would like to see I think this is such a serious issue. And I think this is a massively serious issue that the UK as a whole has an opportunity here to lead the world in some respects. But again, it comes back to that idea of I suppose, a joined up strategy. What I would like to see would be something like, and we'll call it the National Academy of Cross-Training into Data, that would be jointly supported by industry and the public sector. And it would have classrooms, and those classrooms would teach everything from strategy to science. And it would all be about cross-training from whatever industry you were in to the huge needs of the data and technology industry. If this gentleman is watching at this point in time, he will remember a conversation that him and I had where he came to me with an amazing idea, which was all about pilots and navigators at the very beginning of COVID. People with incredible problem-solving skills, people with incredible mathematical statistical skills. A whole load of them had been made redundant at the same time. A whole load of them had been put in furlough. We could have done something with those people. We could have had those people into the industry a year and a half ago, but we don't have anything that I would say would be almost like a national academy for cross-training. We need it. We absolutely need it, because we're not going to be able to generate the right amount of skilled individuals relying purely on the academic route or relying on the vocational route. I think that there would be a very strong case for something that was partially funded by public sector and by industry. I would say here we know what we're going to need for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. We know what we're going to need. We could be appealing to all sorts of different industry sectors and cross-training individuals.
See, I think this is where I think, Rob, you're right in that notion that there is a definite need there. But this is where I think there is a need for government to step in. About 3 years ago, we tried to get a project off the ground through Innovate UK that would be funded by the public purse to look at the requirements to create a lifelong learning environment that would support the acquisition of both technical and data skills at various stages through people's life for various reasons. So some of those would be for employability. Some of those would just be to become more data or technologically literate. And the concept was that you would have this centralized movement in terms of setting a strategy and a direction of travel, but you would have this hugely distributed and decentralized delivery model that would allow people to acquire these skills from advocates, supporters, and businesses that wanted to participate, principally because they would also be able to tap into that rich stream of talented individuals, but also because they would feel they would want to give something back that would mean that people were in a more informed, capable, and skill-soluble environment. And that was turned down. It was rejected on the basis that it wasn't seen as a project that could be measured in terms of successful outcomes. Because obviously we're talking about something here which is probably a generation long in terms of delivery, rather than something that we can say, let's run it for 6 months and see what we can generate. And I think it's a little bit like solving problems like the NHS. You know, you can't solve the NHS in a 4-year electoral term. You need people who are committed to a long-term change program that is going to bring about the very best by engaging with the right people in different stakeholder groups to be able to come up with a solution there. And I do think that if you could get an Innovate UK project off the ground that actually looked at this, I think that would be your great starter for 10 in terms of how we might mobilize something that would have that national feel.
So we had one last question that I wanted to ask you, and I think it's a potentially tricky one. But the question is essentially how, when we talk about diversity and how people can work from home or the firm can change to suit the employee, does there need to be a balance between how the employee still needs to play by the rules of the firm? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'll maybe give a couple of thoughts on this from my perspective. I think a huge part of this has to be focused on trust across teams and on shared accountabilities for delivery. Pre-pandemic, most of my team worked flexibly anyway, and they would spend a day or so a week at home just to give them a bit more flexibility and save them travelling into the office. And that's something that will continue on with more time at home as we essentially go back into offices or whenever that might be, and we're going to maintain some of the remote working that we have now. I think the thing that we need though to make sure that it works is that there is genuine accountability and for work that's being delivered, and that there's trust across the team. So generally I would expect that whenever we take on a project, that the project will go along to the plan that we've agreed upfront, unless there's something that happens that disrupts that. And if that something happens, that then the person who's working on that project, a particular piece of work, would flag it and say, oh, something's happened, we might not deliver on time, how do we start to kind of solve this thing together? And that's what I mean about that accountability of flagging things early, being able to respond. And that becomes really important when we're working remotely, because you can't physically see or overhear some of the conversations that go on in the office that might flag some of those things. So I think that part there, kind of having trust across the team, everyone behaving as adults, as all playing our part and being able to deliver it, again, I think informed by what we were talking about at the start, that purpose-driven leadership and understanding our part to play within it. And it really, really helps with all of that, and make sure that we can then be successful. Do you think it can be tricky, I think, when people are wholly remote, to maintain that sense of team? And I think making sure, as we spoke about earlier on, that we have that connection, that there's sometimes, you know, we can physically see people, that we're checking in with each other, to make sure that we're still going to be successful in the things that we're doing, and that everyone's going to feel good while they're doing it too.
That's wonderful. Rob, Elizabeth, Paul, thank you all so much for your time this afternoon. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I'm glad it wasn't just me answering questions and sitting here on my own. This has been a lot of fun, so thank you all again.
Oh, thank you.
So,
Cheers.
And thanks everybody that attended. We will be sending out a short follow-up for the event, so where you'll be able to stream the conversation if there's anything you missed or you would like to revisit. So look forward to that in the next week or so.
Okay, thanks.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
bye.